Before I die, I mustered up all my strength to send Felix a breakup text. Felix finally got his wish and brought his goddess back home. However, Felix, who had finally regained his freedom, wasn't as happy as I had imagined. It was only when he broke up with his goddess that Felix realized he had been spoiled by me. He desperately tried to seek my forgiveness, crushing his pride to pieces. But this time, I will never go back. Chapter 1. It was only after my death that I truly believed Felix had never loved me. After a big fight with him, I left the house and got into a car accident not long after. In the last moment before my consciousness faded away, all I could think of was Felix's hateful gaze and that cold remark. "What will it take for you to let me go?" Facing death, I suddenly felt there was no point in clinging to him anymore. I mustered up my last bit of strength to send him a breakup text, ending our 7-year entanglement. However, perhaps as punishment for my wrongdoings, even after my death, fate was not willing to let me go, making me witness how loving Felix and Winnie were. Felix, who had regained his freedom, had no idea about my accident, nor did he care where I had gone. On the day he received the breakup text, he threw away all traces of me left at home. While I was being treated at the hospital, he brought his goddess back home. Seeing the tenderness on Felix's face that I had never seen before, my heart twisted painfully. During a moment of affection, Winnie suddenly asked, "Why did Shirley suddenly agree to let go? Did something happen to her?" My heart clenched. But Felix just frowned, saying, "What could have happened to her? We were never meant to be together, she should have realized that long ago. Stop clinging on, at least we can part ways with some dignity." Suddenly, all those years of persistence felt like a joke. So I gave up. I will never cling to you again. Chapter 2. Indeed, geniuses only fall in love with geniuses. At least that's what I thought before Winnie moved in. However, reality seemed to deviate from my expectations. Felix, who was finally free of me and now with Winnie, didn't seem as happy as I had imagined. On the first day Winnie moved in, they had a big fight, the tension so thick that even my soul felt suffocated. The reason for their argument was simply the decoration style of their new home after I had left. That's when I realized Felix had been spoiled by me long ago. Throughout the 7 years we were together, no matter what he wanted to do, I would silently support him, even when I was unhappy. Because of this, Felix often mocked me for lacking independence and deserving to be an ordinary person. However, now that he was finally with Winnie, he forgot that Winnie, like him, was a genius who had been pampered and adored, so how could she be like me, spoiling him without boundaries? Two people refused to back down. Coincidentally, Winnie received a call from the studio. She slammed the door with a cold face and left, leaving Felix alone, sitting blankly in the living room. In the end, Felix chose to take a step back. I watched Felix, who had never entered the kitchen in 7 years, prepare dinner in a panic to please Winnie, feeling a bit sour in my heart. Suddenly, Felix gasped and rushed out in a panic, clutching his hand cut by a knife. A shocking wound stretched across Felix's hand. In the past, I would have definitely been surprised and taken him to the hospital. Or perhaps, I would never let such a thing happen in the first place. Felix's hands were for drawing, he was a genius, his hands must not be harmed. Clearly, Felix was also startled by the sudden accident. He subconsciously called my name, then froze in place. The living room fell silent, with no one frantically dropping everything to rush to his side. Felix self-mockingly pulled the corners of his mouth, coldly went to get the medicine. In the end, dinner was not made, Felix ordered takeout, and waited until almost dawn before Winnie leisurely returned from outside. The food had already gone cold. Felix hung his head, his slightly long bangs covering his eyes, making it impossible to discern his expression. However, having been by Felix's side for 7 years, I knew that a silent anger was brewing. Of course, Winnie couldn't see it. She glanced at Felix in surprise. "Why are you still sitting here?" My heart tightened. If it were me speaking to Felix like this, he would definitely slam the door and not come back for several days. But Winnie was Winnie, as Felix's goddess, she had enough arrogant confidence. The veins on Felix's hand suddenly surged, but his words remained gentle. I was waiting for you to have dinner, why didn't you answer the phone? Winnie frowned, unwilling to argue with him about this matter. There's an art exhibition in the mountain city next week, I have to go. We finally got together, can't you postpone work matters for a while? Winnie stopped in her tracks, quietly looked at Felix, and casually threw her bag at his feet. Felix's carefully prepared reconciliation ended like this. The two of them had a big argument, their tone more intense than this morning. In the end, neither of them wanted to back down. Winnie, with uneven breath, gathered her hair that hung down, stepped high in anger, and suddenly grabbed Felix's collar. Felix, you really have been spoiled, thinking everyone would spoil you like Shirley. I have my career too. Love is just a seasoning of life, if you can't take it, just break up, maybe you can still catch up with Shirley now. Felix was completely stunned, a rare trace of confusion appeared in his eyes. After a while, he heavily slumped his shoulders, cautiously embraced Winnie. Don't mention her, please, I finally got rid of her, maybe we've been apart for too long, Winnie, give me a little more time, I will change. Winnie fell silent, but ultimately did not push him away. In their eyes, I was just a thief taking advantage of their vulnerability. Even though they were together now, they still worried that I might go crazy again one day and try to separate them. I felt a bit weary, they were overthinking, I will never go back. After all, I'm already dead. Chapter 3. However, Felix's concessions did not prolong this hard-won relationship. The two quarreled constantly, from trivial matters to creative concepts, almost everything in the house was overturned. Winnie had her own pride, so she didn't bother whether Felix would feel bad or not. After a big fight, she would slam the door and leave, leaving Felix to worry alone. I watched the person who couldn't even bear to say a serious word, shrunk on the sofa drinking alone, feeling a bit stifled in my heart. The real emotional outburst was on Felix's birthday. I never expected Winnie to forget Felix's birthday. Since the two had a big fight 2 days ago, Winnie went directly to a neighboring province for a conference. By the time Felix found out, she was already gone. This was the first birthday in 7 years that Felix celebrated without me. I thought this would be his happiest birthday, having his favorite person by his side, with no one else to disturb his life. But I never thought it would turn out to be his loneliest birthday. In previous years, I would always prepare a birthday surprise for him a month in advance, even though Felix never appreciated it. He would even deliberately come back very late on his birthday. The lights in the living room were off, Felix sat by the French window pouring himself a drink, the dim moonlight shining on his face, concealing his expression. After about 10 o'clock, Felix visibly became restless. He began to constantly check his phone, as if waiting for a message from someone. At first, I didn't know who he was waiting for, until his gaze lingered on our chat interface for a long time, then I suddenly came to my senses. I couldn't help but curl my lips in self-mockery, unable to express what I was feeling deep down. Felix, are you waiting for my birthday wishes? But I will never bother you again. With no one to talk to, he hunched his back and quietly stared at the screen, waiting for that person who would never message him again. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and both of us were stunned in place. If I wasn't standing right next to him, I would have thought I had shamelessly approached him again to embarrass myself. Felix couldn't help but lift the corner of his lips, a hint of satisfaction flashing in his eyes. He let the doorbell ring for quite some time before getting up to open the door casually. I knew it was you. What are you doing here? Felix paused, his fingers on the doorknob involuntarily twitched. Winnie raised an eyebrow. Who else could it be if not me? I forgot my keys, why are you so slow? Felix still stood at the door, and it took a long time before he slowly closed the door. He looked at Winnie, who was resting on the couch with her eyes closed, and a hint of sarcasm flashed in his eyes. Winnie, today is my birthday. Winnie was a bit confused, took out her phone and looked at it for a long time before speaking somewhat awkwardly. Sorry, I've been busy discussing a collaboration with Mr. Lee recently, a bit absent-minded. I'll treat you to dinner tomorrow. Felix seemed a bit exhausted. We are lovers, not business partners. Can you stop using your work excuses on me? Winnie couldn't bear such criticism. What do you mean by excuses? I didn't forget on purpose. We're all adults now, can you stop being so unreasonable? Do you forget why Shirley can remember? Are you saying you don't love me as much as she does? The air fell into dead silence. Felix suddenly realized that he had said the wrong words, and he hammered the wall in regret. Winnie looked at him coldly. Felix, you should know better than anyone that Shirley must be the person who loves you the most in this world. Since you don't cherish her, why do you still long for her kindness to you? There was a hint of sadness in her eyes. I thought we could go back to the past, but the current you just makes people feel suffocated. Let's break up. The door closed, and the huge room was left with only Felix. I watched him shrink on the sofa, feeling uncomfortable. Felix, is this the true love you wanted to pursue? No one answered my question. Felix still stared blankly at his phone until the clock struck 12, until the phone's last bit of battery drained. Only then did his gaze move away from that chat box that would never reply to him again. He muttered to himself. Shirley, are you really ignoring me? My heart skipped a beat. Yes, Felix, I am ignoring you. You are free now. Chapter 4. In the second week of being with Winnie, Felix broke up with her. After seeing Winnie off, Felix sent me a message with a serious expression, asking me where I was. Normally, receiving a message from Felix would have surprised me, and I would have replied to him immediately no matter what I was doing. Felix seemed convinced that I would respond as usual. After sending the message, he directly turned off the screen, waiting to wake up to a bombardment of messages from me. However, what he didn't know was that he would never receive my messages again. When he groggily woke up, his subconscious reached for his phone, but aside from someone gossiping about Win and moving out, there were no other messages on the chat interface. Felix incredulously refreshed several times before finally believing that I truly hadn't replied to him. But of course, as a wandering spirit now, I had no way to reply to him. After several unanswered calls, Felix visibly became agitated. As a mechanical female voice sounded from his phone, he smashed it in frustration. However, he quickly regained his composure, picked up the broken phone in a panic, but the screen remained unresponsive despite his attempts. For the current Felix, the phone was the cheapest thing on him. If it broke, he would just throw it away. Yet, he still rushed to the repair shop that night. The repair technician glanced at him several times. Young man, you probably aren't short on money. This phone must have been around for a while. It's better to get a new one. Felix pursed his lips without saying a word. The technician, with a hint of thoughtfulness, couldn't help but tease him. There must be something important inside. Felix awkwardly turned his face away, and after a while, he managed to respond with an MHM. Relieved to have his phone back, Felix breathed a sigh of relief, checked to ensure all the data was intact, and finally relaxed his furrowed brows. He squatted on the street and called me several times, only to reluctantly accept that I truly would not answer his calls anymore. Cigarette butts piled up at his feet, and after a long time, he hammered the wall in frustration. However, as if suddenly recalling something, he hastily flipped through the address book. Jonas, please have Shirley answer the phone, I need to talk to her. My younger brother snorted. Felix, didn't you two break up a long time ago? Felix's tone carried a hint of urgency and pleading that he himself was unaware of. I never agreed to it, Shirley wanted to break up. You make her say it to my face. My brother remained silent for a long time, his voice trembling uncontrollably. She won't come looking for you again. Chapter 5. Only after my death did I realize that perhaps Felix did care a little about me. While I was still alive, my brother couldn't stand Felix. Every time they met, there was constant sarcasm and mockery. Now that I'm gone, my brother no longer had to consider my feelings. When Felix came looking for news about me, he had the bodyguards throw him out. It was the first time I saw Felix in such a sorry state. It was pouring rain that day, and Felix stood straight in the rain all afternoon. He kept looking towards the company entrance, as if the next moment that silly girl would rush to him again. Full of concern, asking him why he wasn't taking care of himself and then foolishly forgetting everything that had happened, going home with him. Unfortunately, no matter how long he waited this time, he couldn't wait for the person who used to shelter him from the rain. Every time someone came out of the company, Felix looked up hopefully. Until the last light went out, the hope in his eyes slowly faded away. My brother looked down at him, eyes filled with mockery. "Felix, who are you pretending for?" Felix's steps seemed uncertain, and under my brother's constant taunting, his face grew even paler. He didn't say a word of retort from start to finish, just clenched his hands tightly. When my brother had scolded enough, Felix finally spoke, his tone carrying an unwitting sense of humility and earnestness. "Jonas, can I see Shirley for a moment? This is between us, Shirley certainly wouldn't want you to interfere too much." My brother's eyes were bloodshot, a hint of tears flickering in his eyes. In response to Felix, my brother mercilessly threw a punch. Unprepared, Felix was knocked over by a punch, falling heavily to the ground. He licked the blood from the corner of his mouth, chuckled somewhat self-deprecatingly. "Jonas, go ahead and hit me, but once you're done venting, can you let Shirley come back?" My brother didn't listen to a word Felix said, the dense flurry of punches landing on Felix until those around realized he was really going to get violent and quickly pulled them apart. My brother, not caring about the blood covering his hands, wiped away the tears that were about to fall, couldn't help but let out a laugh, though his voice was filled with choking and trembling. Felix seemed to realize something, dragging his injured body, he slowly crawled to my brother, grabbing onto his pant leg. My brother grabbed his hair. "Felix, no one is stopping my sister, she doesn't want you, she's disgusted by you, she won't come back, are you satisfied?" The last glimmer of light in Felix's eyes extinguished, he was thrown into the rain, lying in a pool of blood, like a homeless stray dog. Suddenly, an umbrella appeared over his head. Felix was stunned for a moment, struggling with all his strength to get up. "Surely, I was wrong." But it was just a passerby, who, seeing Felix's ferocious appearance, took several steps back in fear. Felix stared blankly, only then realizing too late that no one would shelter him with an umbrella anymore. Chapter 6. After being sent to the hospital, Felix's mental state has not been good. During this time, Winnie visited him several times. She couldn't accept seeing the once proud son of heaven now in this state and couldn't help but slap him twice. Felix, however, seemed not to feel any pain at all, his hollow eyes fixed on Winnie. "Shirley really doesn't want me. What should I do?" Winnie angrily grabbed his collar. "If you regret it, then find a way to make amends. Lying here like a dead dog, what can you change, Felix? I really misjudged you." It's unclear which of Winnie's words triggered Felix, but he gradually started to turn things around. That night, he secretly removed the needle and went straight home. I watched him cautiously touch my door. "Just wait for me a little longer." After that day, Felix almost locked himself in the studio day and night. When he got hungry, he would casually grab some takeout. When he was too tired, he would come to my room to rest for a while. In just a few days, his body collapsed, and he developed a high fever. Felix seemed delirious, refusing to take his medicine. Instead, he curled up in my bed, repeatedly reading through our chat records. "Shirley, I feel so terrible. Please come back and see me, I miss you so much." I listened, feeling a lump in my throat. "Felix, I am right by your side, but you cannot be so cruel. How can you only realize my worth after I'm gone? I can't go back." Chapter 7. After several days of turmoil, Felix finally moved his work to the living room with great care. Upon seeing the content of the painting, I could only feel mockery, heartache, and powerlessness, tearing at my soul incessantly. This was the first time Felix had painted something for me. When I was alive, I often asked him to paint a picture for me, but each time ended with a meal of mockery from him. He was a genius, so how could he paint something so devoid of artistic sense? I questioned him about why he secretly painted so many small portraits of Winnie if he felt that way. At that moment, Felix's eyes were full of disdain. "Winnie is art. Painting someone like you is just bland and uninteresting, Shirley, why embarrass yourself?" Now he had finally painted what I had always wanted, but I was already dead and no longer cared. Felix reverently caressed the figure in the painting inch by inch, his eyes becoming incredibly gentle. "Surely, wait for me to bring you back." After finishing the painting, Felix looked slightly more relaxed than before. He lay back on the couch, closing his eyes to rest, with only the sound of the TV host's voice in the room. However, soon after, I felt my whole body stiffen as the TV broadcasted the news report about my accident. Felix listened with half-closed eyes, but soon, he began trembling uncontrollably. His gaze fell on a very inconspicuous corner on the scene, as if desperately trying to confirm that he was mistaken. He almost pressed himself against the screen. Yet, whether he wanted to admit it or not, the truth would not change. A bracelet had snapped into two pieces, lying lonely on the ground. It was the couple's bracelet that I had insisted on buying back. Although the day after I bought it back, Felix casually threw his part into a corner, I still couldn't bear to take it off. Felix sat on the ground, looking particularly helpless. Impossible, how could this be? He suddenly stood up. After days and nights of tossing and turning, he swayed and fell straight to the ground, blood gushing out instantly. But he seemed to not care at all, stumbled to his feet, carefully wrapped the painting, and hurried towards my home. I had imagined many scenarios in which he learned of my death. Perhaps one day, after being with Winnie for a long time, he accidentally found out that the person who used to cling to him had finally died. He might think it's karma, that I deserved it all, then he would finally breathe a sigh of relief, happily live out his life with Winnie. Or maybe he would still remember the tiny bit of affection between us and feel a tinge of emotion. But no matter what, in my understanding, he would never shed a tear for my death. Yet now, he was kneeling at my doorstep, begging my family to let him see me. The Felix at this moment was no longer the arrogant genius I remembered, kneeling in the rain, using his last ounce of strength to protect the painting. But the rain was too heavy, and despite his efforts, the painting was slowly getting wet. I wanted to let him go, I had already forgiven him, he should go and live the life he wanted. But he couldn't hear, still stubbornly waiting for someone who would never appear again. After a long time, the door to my house slowly opened. Felix's eyes lit up for a moment, but as he saw who came out, the light in his eyes slowly faded away. My brother looked down from above, silently watching the person kneeling in the rain. He didn't get angry, his eyes only held an unshakable sadness. Felix stared at him intently, trying to glean any hint from his eyes, but undoubtedly, he failed. "Jonas can surely come out to see me, I promise I won't do anything, I just want to see her from afar, I'm really worried about her." My brother smiled, full of irony. "Felix, my sister loved you so much, but how did you treat her? For a whole 7 years, she wasted her entire youth on you, only to receive your sarcasm. Now that she's gone, she set you free, so why do you have the right to pretend to be affectionate now?" Felix's pupils contracted, and it took him a while to find his voice again. "Gone, what do you mean?" My brother looked at him with a hint of pity, and that was the final verdict for him. "Felix, my sister had an accident, on the day you took Winnie back." Chapter 8. After my death, Felix seemed to suddenly fall in love with me. Upon hearing the news of my death, Felix went home in a daze and curled up in my bedroom, sleeping for a long time. When he woke up, he repeatedly dialed the number that would never connect again. He told me he knew he was wrong, begging me not to leave him. But we both knew, I would never forgive him over and over again like in the past. He began to numb himself with alcohol, drinking until he bled from his stomach and passed out at home. If Winnie hadn't coincidentally found him, he might have truly come to accompany me. However, when he woke up, the situation had not improved at all. No matter how Winnie scolded or shouted at him, Felix had no reaction anymore. Winnie knelt by his bedside, crying bitterly. "What's wrong with you? You were the most talented among us back then, how could you treat yourself like this?" Felix's eyes flickered, and he let out a self-deprecating chuckle. "Shirley always said I was a genius, but she was wrong. I'm the dumbest one. 7 years have passed, and I still can't even understand my own feelings. I'm so foolish. That's why she doesn't want me anymore." No one could persuade him anymore. When Felix was sober, he repeatedly went through our chat history and listened to the voice messages I sent him. He tried to find my photos, but how could he allow something he once despised to remain on his phone? Until he suddenly remembered something, he pulled out the needle and headed straight for the door. Winnie, who he bumped into head-on, stopped him and slapped him hard. "Felix, have you gone mad?" Felix gripped her shoulders tightly, causing Winnie to wince in pain. She initially wanted to slap Felix again, but when she saw his tear-filled, lost eyes, she hesitated and lowered her hand. Felix sounded particularly anxious, even getting choked up. "Winnie, have you seen my graduation photo that I left in the living room?" Winnie avoided his gaze and finally said. "Felix, I threw away all those things the day I moved in." The stiff smile on Felix's face disappeared completely. He let go of Winnie and silently walked out. "Where are you going?" Felix forced a smile. "I'm going to retrieve those things. If Shirley comes back and finds everything missing, she'll be heartbroken." Winnie's expression turned particularly grim, her face pale, looking somewhat terrified as she watched Felix walk away, muttering to herself. "Mad. Truly mad." Not only Winnie but even I thought Felix had gone mad. He knew better than anyone else that I would never return. Chapter 9. I followed Felix all the way, this being the third recycling station we had visited. It had been so long, how could we possibly find those things? But Felix remained persistent, dragging his feverish body, moving forward step by step. Suddenly, he slipped, falling forward and rolling down the slope, hitting a sharp rock. My pupils contracted, and I instinctively called out to him. The next moment, I saw Felix open his eyes in disbelief, his gaze slowly fixing on where my soul resided. His expression suddenly brightened, a smile breaking out, but tears fell heavily to the ground. He tried to come to me, but he was too injured. He could only look up at me with effort. "Shirley, are you here to take me?" My emotions were incredibly complex. It was only now that I truly believed Felix had a tiny bit of affection for me. It's just that this affection came too late. After 7 long years, my full of love had long been worn down, and what little remained was probably just disbelief in his complete lack of affection for me. However, those obsessions had quietly dissipated the moment I died. I quietly watched him. "Felix, I set you free. Live your own life. I don't love you anymore." The moment I said those words, I felt the oppressive feeling that had been with me since becoming a soul slowly fade away. I looked at Felix with a particularly frightened expression, as he crawled towards me with all his might. Looking down, I realized that my soul was slowly dissipating. Shirley, no, please don't leave me, I beg you not to leave me." I smiled somewhat relieved, squatting down and gently touching his forehead with my hand. "Goodbye, senior." Chapter 10. My life was especially short, and when I looked back hurriedly, most of my memories were unexpectedly occupied by Felix. I liked him from a very young age. From the day I met him, he had always been considered a genius by everyone. He radiated brilliance, irresistibly drawing people near, even if they were repeatedly scorched, but still couldn't help but get closer. To be closer to him, I even learned art, something I was not good at. After much effort, when I finally stood in front of him, he glanced at my painting and then furrowed his brows harshly. "Can just anyone get into this school now?" He looked me up and down, then somewhat abruptly spoke. "Classmate, your family background should be pretty good, right? With this mindset, why not do something else? You're not suited for this." Understanding the underlying meaning of his words, my face instantly flushed red, and my words came out stuttered. "Senior, I didn't." But he was unwilling to linger with me any longer, leaving somewhat disappointed. From that moment, I knew that Felix was a genius, and no matter how hard I tried, I could never catch up to his pace. I buried my affection deep down, only daring to secretly look up at him. But he gave me a chance. At that time, almost everyone in the department knew that Felix liked Winnie. Before I arrived, Felix had confessed to Winnie many times. But for some reason, although Winnie seemed to have feelings for Felix, she never accepted his advances. Felix, being the pride of heaven, couldn't bear such grievances. After being rejected for the last time, Felix never approached Winnie again. At that moment, I thought I finally had a chance, desperately trying to get closer to him. Not long after, the whole school knew that Felix had a little follower. People teased. "Your little follower is looking for you again, why don't you go see her?" He was surrounded by a group of admirers until he stood in front of me, raising his eyebrows and looking me up and down. "I heard you like me." My face instantly turned red, no longer hearing what anyone else was saying, just dumbly nodding my head. Felix smiled. At that time, I didn't understand what that meant. Now, it seems he was probably mocking my ignorance. I foolishly became Felix's girlfriend, and no one expected Felix to end up with me in the end. But I knew, Felix didn't really like me. He just used me as a pawn to provoke Winnie, hoping to make Winnie give in to him. Even so, I cherished this opportunity exceptionally. To study art, I had many unpleasant conflicts with my family. During my school days, my family almost cut off all my financial resources. Therefore, not long after being with Felix, he realized that I was not some rich girl. Looking at the art supplies I scrimped and saved to buy, Felix couldn't help but mock. "I can't believe you're so vain. I don't need these things. If you have this much time, why not think about how to improve your lousy skills? I really don't know why you came to this place." I stood there, at a loss, feeling like crying. And so, our strange relationship continued for 3 years, until graduation, and Felix never got Winnie to soften towards him. Chapter 11. His attitude towards me changed a year later. By then, I had reconciled with my family, had enough financial support for him to pursue his dreams. I thought everything was progressing well, but instead of that, I was met with Felix's increasingly disdainful gaze. That night, I went to pick up the heavily drunk Felix, and I happened to overhear his friend teasing him. "Winnie and Shirley are not from the same world. You still expect her to dote on you like Shirley does? Let me tell you, even though Shirley might be a bit foolish, she's wealthy, being kept by someone should make you happy." Felix looked at him darkly, grabbed a bottle and smashed it over his head. I couldn't help but scream in shock, and when I looked up, I saw Felix staring at me with a serious expression. That night, we had our first big fight. "Surely, you don't think finding that kind of scum can convince me, do you? Being kept, without you pestering me, I could live 1,000 times better than now." My heart kept aching. Apparently, in Felix's eyes, my love was just a shackle to him, a blemish on his perfect life. But at that time, I stubbornly refused to let go, choosing to torture myself repeatedly in this unequal relationship until all my passion was exhausted. I bowed down, no longer interfering too much in his life. Even though I was his nominal girlfriend, I didn't dare ask where he went. Looking back now, I was truly a joke. Chapter 12. I never thought I would still be alive. Even though every inch of my body was in excruciating pain, I was incredibly certain I was still alive, still breathing. My younger brother walked in looking exhausted, and the moment our eyes met, I shuddered all over, allowing the water jug to fall heavily on me. "Sis." He told me many things that almost made me unable to wake up, about how Mom and Dad aged several years in just one night, and about what Felix had been doing during this time. Of course, I knew what Felix had done, but perhaps having already died once, mentioning Felix's name only made my heart twitch slightly, then quickly returned to calm. It was only then that I remembered the last moment I left, Felix lying wounded in the outskirts. After thinking for a long time, I couldn't help but ask, "Is he okay?" My brother looked resentful. "Sis, please don't be fooled by him. He only knows how to cherish something after losing it. After you return, he will surely go back to his old self." I forced a smile. "No, we have already broken up." My brother was taken aback, clearly not expecting me to say that. He gently touched my palm, his tone heavy. "That's good, you've been through so much all these years." After a long pause, he spoke again. "Felix has been quite miserable lately, but a little care and he'll be fine. He's just been on edge." Before he could finish his sentence, there was a commotion of hurried footsteps outside, and faintly, we could hear someone talking about cutting wrists or something. My brother hung his head, and after a long while, he seemed to have made up his mind. Sis, Felix is in this hospital. If you want to go see him, I can push you over. Thinking about recent events, I eventually nodded. Some things should be resolved properly. Chapter 13. Meeting Felix again, I finally understood what my younger brother meant by not feeling well. He was pinned down by several medical personnel, with a shocking red mark on his wrist. Seemingly aware of someone watching him from outside the window, Felix's gaze shifted slightly, and when he saw me, he became quiet. He softly uttered my name, his eyes shimmering with tears. As the people in the room slowly dispersed, my brother nudged me inside. Felix's gaze was fixed on me, afraid that I would disappear again in the next moment like before. Surely, is it really you? I didn't speak, just smiled at him. Felix, you've lost weight. Now that you're finally free, you should go live the life you want. Felix kept shaking his head, tears soaking the pillow. Surely, I was wrong. I can't be without you. Please come back. You always wanted me to paint for you, right? From now on, I'll only paint for you. Before I could say anything, my brother couldn't help but mock him. Felix, you really think highly of yourself. You always see yourself as superior, and my sister as mediocre, unworthy of you. But ask yourself, without my sister secretly helping you all these years, would your talent alone have sustained you? Felix, what you hold in high regard is nothing in my family's eyes. I interrupted my brother. Forget it, Felix. We've both wasted so many years on each other. It's time to get back on track. You're right, I was never cut out for art. I've been stubborn for so many years, it's time to let go. I gently pried open Felix's fingers, tightly clutching my sleeve. After my wounds heal, I might be going abroad. Maybe it'll be many years before we see each other again. Take care of yourself in the meantime, and stop landing yourself in the hospital so frequently. Felix shook his head desperately, trying to reach out for me. But no matter how hard he tried, he ended up empty-handed. Seeing him about to fall off the bed, I sighed. Felix, didn't you say you wanted to leave at least with some dignity? As if realizing something, his face slowly turned pale, unable to look up again, begging me to come back. Chapter 14. Many years passed in the blink of an eye. Over the years, I gradually integrated into the core of the company, started building my own projects, and life was slowly improving. Today is my wedding day. My husband and I were introduced by our parents. After years of long-distance love, we had become accustomed to each other's presence. Getting married was almost a natural progression. On our wedding day, I received a painting from across the ocean. The painting was titled A Pilgrimage, with vibrant and intense colors, as if all the world's fiery emotions were infused into it. My husband curiously glanced at it. Nice painting, clearly the work of a rare genius. My heart skipped a beat, as a figure long forgotten in the depths of memory slowly emerged. My husband couldn't help but study me for a few more moments. Is there something wrong? Only then did I snap out of it, forced a smile, and had the painting put away. Nothing, let's go. At that time, I was thinking, Felix must be doing well too, maybe he has already fulfilled his dream from his student days and become a famous painter. That painting was also collected along with many other guests' collections, hidden away in a corner. Until one day, a long time later, while chatting with a friend from back home, he casually mentioned, "It's a pity about Felix as well. He was considered a prodigy during his school days, several teachers had high hopes for him, but unfortunately, he got into a car accident and passed away early." I was momentarily stunned. What are you saying? You didn't know, Felix is no longer with us. After that, I couldn't hear a single word of his rambling. I walked aimlessly, as if it were predestined, and once again, I saw that painting. Without the careful maintenance, the colors were no longer as vibrant as they used to be. My gaze lingered inch by inch over the painting, and suddenly, a small line of text in the corner caught all of my attention. It read, Felix's life, 1987 to 2017. In 2017, that year, I got married.